Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome to our side event. We are so pleased that you could join us today for our discussion on showcasing subnational and private sector solutions to achieve equity, efficiency, and clean energy goals. My name is Laura Tierney, and I'm Vice President of International Programs at the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, a multi-sector clean energy trade association based in Washington, D.C. And I will also be your MC for today's program. BCSE is so pleased to work with our friends at the Georgetown Climate Center, the Climate Registry, and the U.S. Green Building Council to bring you today's event. And at its heart, this will be a discussion about public-private partnership. It will also feature reports from the front lines of the energy transition and climate action. Our first panel will bring you the private sector viewpoint, and our second panel will share the perspective of our local and state government policymakers. In these panel discussions, you will hear about areas of partnership, synergy, and convergence, about how both the public and private sectors are working to unlock new streams of finance, accelerate deployment of solutions that deliver climate, economic, resilience, health, productivity benefits, and more. So let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Kate Zyla, Executive Director at the Georgetown Climate Center, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much, Laura. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kate Zyla. As Laura said, I'm the Executive Director of the Georgetown Climate Center, and we are thrilled to be co-sponsoring this panel with these partners. We're going to spend most of today's conversation talking about subnational public and private sector action, but we're actually going to get started at the federal level and lay a little bit of the groundwork for the conversation today. And I'm really thrilled to introduce today's keynote speaker, Chair of the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, Brenda Mallory. Chair Mallory has served in this role since 2021, advising the President on environmental and natural resources policies. She is focused particularly on addressing environmental justice and climate change challenges while advancing opportunities for job growth and economic development. She has spent about 20 years in public service at both CEQ and the Environmental Protection Agency, and we're really honored to have her join us today to set the stage for this conversation. Welcome, Chair Mallory.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm very big on the importance of the public-private partnership world in general, but particularly now. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak to all of you today. And thank you to both Kate and Laura for opening us up and setting the stage for what I think will be a great conversation. So I'd like to just begin by highlighting some of the progress that we've actually all made together. I think one of the things that has been true of this administration really from day one is that we came in very focused on the importance of all sectors in this challenge that we had in climate change, and critically the importance of all the partnerships that go with that. And so when I talk about the work that we've done, I'm talking about the work that we've collectively done together, and that I think will continue on. So over the past 4 years, President Biden and Vice President Harris have delivered unquestionably the most ambitious climate change, clean energy, conservation, and environmental justice agenda in history. And through the Investing in America agenda, which included two critical legislative successes, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, the President and the Vice President have delivered once-in-a-generation investments to rebuild our nation's infrastructure, advance clean energy, a clean energy economy, and tackle the climate crisis. The investments have put the United States on track to hit President Biden's goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. The Inflation Reduction Act is unleashing a clean energy boom in America that is boosting innovation and lowering costs for clean energy technology by as much as 25%. And our administration has permitted more than 15 gigawatts of offshore wind projects, enough to power 5.25 million homes. In total, just since the president took office, companies have announced more than 450 billion, that's billion dollars in new clean energy investments. We have also used the purchasing power of the federal government to catalyze the market for cleaner construction materials, and we've worked with regional partners to develop regional markets for the low emission concrete space. As we have worked with partners to grow a clean energy economy, we are ensuring that no one is left behind. This is driven by the president's Justice 40 initiative, which aims to ensure that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal climate, clean energy, and other investments flow to disadvantaged communities, marginalized by underinvestment and overburdened by pollution. I've seen firsthand how these investments are already making a difference in communities. I recently met with the Mayor Muhammad from Benton Harbor, Michigan, who told me that his city was able to replace all of its lead pipes after receiving funding from President Biden's historic water infrastructure investments. To date, we have replaced more than 350,000 lead pipes across the country, benefiting nearly 1 million people. Last year, I traveled to New Britain, Connecticut, where I visited the Goodwin Technical High School to celebrate almost $9 million to purchase 25 electric vehicles for that school system. Thanks to this investment, students, educators, and neighboring communities will no longer experience daily exposure to diesel exhaust that can lead to asthma and respiratory illnesses and worsen existing heart and lung disease. To date, we have deployed over 6,000 low and zero emission transit buses and over 8,700 clean school buses across the country, prioritizing disadvantaged communities. We have helped plug over 9,000 orphan oil and gas wells that pollute communities with methane leaks. We've removed hazardous fuel material from 18 million acres of land to protect communities from wildfire. And those are just a few examples of the enduring progress we have achieved over the past 4 years. Although we will face some setbacks on our domestic climate momentum moving forward, I remain hopeful that this foundation will continue on beyond the Biden-Harris administration. The work to combat the climate change and grow clean energy economy will continue in the United States. Our partners across all levels of government, industry, and non-government organizations, as well as our partners around the world, are carrying on this work in the future. And so that includes everyone in this room today. So thank you for your continued championship of the continued efforts to address the climate change crisis. Your work and your leadership will remain essential to achieving our goals. And with that, I look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Chair Mallory, for all the work that you've done over the past 4 years to advance the clean energy economy in a just and equitable way. We thank you from those of us in the room and on the panels today. So now I would like to call up our first panel. Please come up. We have tagged this panel with 3 key words that you can listen for: investing, deploying, and implementation. This session will delve into how the private sector is working at the front lines to deliver scalable and equitable solutions to decarbonize the buildings, energy, industry, and transport sectors. Welcome to Elizabeth Beardsley of the U.S. Green Building Council, who will moderate this session.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Chair Mallory, for those inspiring words and for all the work you've done over your long career. Thank you. So really excited to talk about all the great things that are happening on the ground through the private sector in a wide range of roles. So just want to start with giving each of our panelists a moment to introduce themselves, what their organization is about, kind of what the role of the organization in decarbonization, whether that's directly focusing on your footprint or supporting other entities in decarbonizing, and then why you're at COP29, what you're hoping to get out of your time here. And why don't we start with Paul?
Thank you so much, Liz, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Lau, the CEO of Sacramento Municipal Utility District, normally known as called SMUD. We are the 6th largest public-owned utility in the USA, serving the Sacramento area, which is the capital of California, the 5th largest economy in the world. And back in 2020, our board actually has set a very, very aggressive goal. In fact, they declare a climate emergency declarations along with the city. And so back in 2020, our board said, you know what? Our customer has talked to us. They want us to tackle climate change as one of the biggest threats facing mankind. So after 6 months, about a couple hundred meetings in the communities, we developed our 2030 zero carbon plan, which is one of the most aggressive carbon reduction plans for any large utility in the nations. We want to get to zero carbon by 2030. And we made 2 promises to our community. They said, first thing we said is that, we want to maintain our world-class reliability because we're electric utility. Secondly, we want to make sure our rates is affordable because we know every dollar we take out from the rates, we take out from the local economy. So we have made a commitment that we will not raise rates higher than inflation. And so with that, we actually put together a plan that is going to spend $4.7 billion in the next decade to try to get to zero carbon by 2030, which is 15 years ahead of the California state mandate. And what we're doing is that we're going to spend $2.7 billion, basically looking at how do you revamp our 5 existing power plants, also tripling our renewables that we're putting on, and then also doubling our energy efficiencies. But more importantly, we're also going to spend $2 billion to accelerate both building and transportation electrifications. And when we said that, when you talk about carbon and you talk about air quality, you cannot not talk about the building and transportation sector because we emit about 2 million metric tons of carbon a year, but the transportation and the building sector emits 6 million metric tons of carbon. So our goal is actually not net zero. Our goal is actually net 1 million metric tons of carbon by 2030. And right now, we're very proud that we are well on our way to get there. We went from 52% at 2022 for zero carbon from our power supply. We're actually right now 80% carbon free. And then also our rate is one of the lowest in California. And we have the highest customer sat, of any utility in California. So one of the things that, when we actually look at our plan, we said we can get to 90% of the way there, but we need partners because we need new technologies like long duration batteries and specifically carbon capture and sequestration. So very happy on the progress that we're able to, they're actually right now working with a contract with Calpine to be the off-takers because we actually went to DOE together last year to win a $270 million grant to convert their 550 megawatt gas-fired plant into be one of the first full commercial decarbonized plant, carbon capture plant in the US. And on top of that, we also partner with a company called ESS for long duration batteries because, in order to integrate as much renewable as we can, we actually need some firming resources like the carbon capture plant that we're talking about. So why am I here at COB? The reason why we're here at COB is because we want to invite partners. We've been actually working with the federal government, the state government, the local government, but more importantly, with both public and private partnerships. So we can all, get to this clean energy transition together. But more importantly, one of the things that we said, we cannot leave any community behind. So that we are actually spending about $20 million a year to build local capacities, NGOs, so that they can actually look at how do we get inclusive workforce development, inclusive economic development as part of this clean energy transition. So that's the reason why we're here at COP is really, first of all, to spread the news and really congratulate the Biden administration, all the outstanding work that they've done the last 4 years, moving the clean energy sector. And then second piece is really, this is an open invitation to the world for anyone who's actually want to join our journey to get to zero carbon and be as quickly and as aggressively as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's really powerful and exciting to hear all that you're doing, not just having a goal, an aggressive goal, then adding additional constraints by deciding you're not going to raise rates past inflation, and then getting the pieces in place to make progress. So I think really thanks for sharing that. Why don't we go to Jessica and hear about TOPSO, another aspect of our energy transition.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks to our partners for convening this important discussion. I see some familiar faces out there. I think we've all been at COP for a few days now, and we're growing a little weary of some of these conversations. So I hope you find something exciting and motivating out of this talk. TOPSO is an 84-year-old startup. I'll wait. That's fine. We are headquartered in Copenhagen, and our bread and butter throughout our history has been chemistry and perfecting chemistry for a better world. So when we first started out, that meant catalysts and catalysis to make, petrochemical and refining processes more efficient. And in the 50s, it was about how do we solve the global food crisis through chemistry. And we innovated a catalyst and process technology that made ammonia production for fertilizer more efficient. And we became a market-leading provider of ammonia technologies. We're still in the vast majority of fertilizer manufacturing facilities in India. That's our technology. When acid rain was a big problem because of the pollution coming out of manufacturing facilities, we innovated another catalyst and process technology to control those emissions. And that's something we still deliver today. But really, in the last couple of decades, we have been focused on decarbonization and leveraging these decarbonization technologies for the energy transition. So our technologies are solutions for about 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. The harder to abate sectors, we call them, ones that cannot be directly electrified. So that's, spaces like hydrogen and ammonia and methanol, long distance transportation fuels, heavy industry decarbonization technologies. And we are in about a third of the hydrogen production in the world today. 1 out of 3 molecules of hydrogen, 1 out of 3 molecules of ammonia is running our technology. It's about 1 in 4 for methanol. We're in between 30 and 40% of the operating capacity globally for renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. So we're a real market leader in these technologies, and we have a deep commitment to scaling them for decarbonizing the global economy. We have our own SBTI validated science-based targets initiative validated net zero target for our own company. That's net zero by 2040. We want our suppliers to also make their own SBTI validated targets. We want 74% of them to do that by 2027. So we're trying to push our value chains as we scale up these technologies to come on this journey with us. And we're just very excited about all the progress that's been made in the United States, thanks to great partnerships among the agencies and the US leadership. We have a manufacturing facility in Denmark to build a market-leading electrolyzer technology that's really going to be the linchpin for that power to X or electrons to molecules production pathway that will be so critical in this decarbonization journey in Denmark. That is at scale. It's 500 megawatts capacity that will be operating by the end of this year and delivering these electrolyzer components by Q1 next year. We've announced a second facility starting at 500 megawatt capacity in Virginia, thanks to the help of the US government. That'll be about a $400 million investment in Virginia and about 150 jobs. So we're really excited about that in the coming years. We support a company that's in Texas, the Port of Victoria, Texas, called First Ammonia, and they will be producing green ammonia at scale with those electrolyzers I talked about. So maybe I'll just stop there, but really exciting technologies to bring to bear. And it really all is about partnerships. We have to build new value chains. We have to build new supply chains in sectors that have not existed before, in industries that have not existed before. So, we're here at COP to talk about those important issues and bring as many of those folks together as we can for success.
Thanks, Jessica. And I love that you brought in the supply chains and using your role as, your purchasing role, which I think is common now across a lot of entities and even governments, as Chair Mallory mentioned with the federal government, to spread like best practice and encourage the science-based targets. So that's great. So why don't we go over to Rama and hear about what Autodesk is doing.
Hi, my name is Rama Danivich, and I work for Autodesk. And I still to this day realize, is that really an annoying buzz? How much people don't know who we are. And so we make 3D design and make software. When you think about the world that we live in, whether it's the buildings that you live in or work in, or the cars you drive in, the bridges you drive across, the products that you use on every day, or even the films and movies and games that inspire you, all of those things are built with Autodesk software. And so when we think about our impact on the planet, if our tools are being used to build the world around us, we have not just an opportunity, but a responsibility to help make our tools help the world decarbonize. And we need to make it not just as easy, but easier to make sustainable, resilient decisions as it is to make your muscle memory decisions. So we've been working really very, very hard to make sure that our software embeds the data and the insights that people need in order to decarbonize. We're particularly present in the built environment, which I think there's no one's been to this conference who hasn't heard. 40% of greenhouse gases come from the built environment. And so it's and most of those decisions that people are making about decarbonization or the emissions from their building happen at the design phase. So if we can, at the design phase, give the insight and data available to people such that they can reduce the amount of carbon that their building will emit over the course of the building, it's our responsibility to do so. And our goal is to actually transform the built environment from being a major emitter to actually being regenerative and being a carbon hold. So it's time for us to switch that argument on its head and change the way that the built environment exists. And so, I mean, to the points that everybody's making, I mean, we're here at COP because we believe in the only way to achieve this is through partnerships, whether that's with business or governments or communities. Again, because our tools are being used to create that, we know that decarbonization is primarily, for us, we see it as a data problem. And if we can help people solve the data problem of decarbonization, then we should be doing that. And we don't feel it's only for Autodesk, obviously. Our commitment is to doing that with other companies. It doesn't matter what software people are using. The software should provide that data and the insights so that people can change the way they work. I was noticing with the introductions, I was just going to talk about Autodesk, but these introductions have gone a little longer, so I will give a specific example. So recently we've been working, I think everybody knows in the United States, there's a affordable housing crisis. It's very, very hard to get permitting for affordable housing, particularly in California where I live. It's very expensive. And so we've been working with the city of Oakland. If you don't know that, that's just right across from San Francisco, on an affordable housing project called Project Phoenix. And we're building 316, we've helped an organization build 316 units of affordable, sustainable housing. And, you know, our role was advising with them with meeting tight deadlines, budget, and building housing that people actually want to live in. And so we used our solutions to rapidly explore design iterations, right? So if there's no reason to have one design, right? And I think that's why in manufacturing, sometimes it's considered easier to decarbonize because you're making something thousands of times. Most buildings are one-offs. And so how can we really explore different design possibilities, in-depth models, including state-of-the-art modular facade, actually that's made from mycelium. For those who don't know, that's mushrooms. The project was so successful in the design phase that they were able to cut the cost by 50%, that reduce the carbon footprint by 50%, and also reduce the time for building multi-unit families by 50%. So it was a tremendous success story. They've now flattened the land, they're starting to do the building, and we think it's really important to address the housing crisis, and we can't have sustainability without livability. And once again, that's our role.
Thanks, Rama. And people might not think of software immediately when they think of all the set of solutions for decarbonization. But, like you, I work in the building sector, and, I always say we need to make, low carbon, sustainable buildings business as usual. Like every single building could be this way. And the way to do it is to normalize it so that, all of the steps along the way, like it's built in. So it's perfect. Thank you. And over to you. Thank you. Oh, okay. There's feedback. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for putting this panel together, and thank you for the co-panelists. My name is Olga Faktorovich Allen, and I'm the Senior Director for Climate Integration and Sustainability at App Global. We are a research and consulting firm, a mission-driven research and consulting firm, going to be celebrating our 60th birthday from our founding this coming January. We were founded to improve the quality of life and economic well-being of people worldwide. And we pursue that mission by creating knowledge and informing policy through research and evaluation, regulatory support, by strengthening systems and organizations through capacity building and technical assistance, and by directly improving the quality of people's lives through service delivery. And we do that across sectors, whether it's health, education, housing and homelessness, workforce development, economic security, and climate and environment. In climate specifically, we focus on energy, methane, and other short-lived super pollutants. Policy coherence, we're supporting the development and implementation of NDCs and NAPs around the world, as well as nature-based solutions, and circular economy, climate finance, and climate and health specifically. As a corporate entity, we of course hold ourselves to the utmost standards of responsibility as well. In fact, we were founded, our DNA is kind of focused on that as well. We have a net zero SBTI verified target for 2050 and an aggressive interim target as well. And we're continuing to explore and implement challenging, but I think innovative solutions in terms of an internal cap and trade to get a hold of our air travel. Again, we're a professional services firm, so some of the issues that we're kind of challenged with are a little different than folks in other industries. But so all in all, we inform and implement more than $2 billion worth of federal and state social and environmental programming across the country. And so, a premise that we were founded on, again, is not only solving the greatest challenges that humanity faces possible, but it's critical to do that with a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approach, that systems approach. And again, we were founded on that premise. I'm thrilled to see that is kind of coming and has come to the climate world, climate sphere. And I think the most powerful argument for action and to get us to move at the speed that the urgency requires is to focus on the health argument. And we're very proud to be supporting data-driven, evidence-based decision that incorporates health impacts into private sector, public sector, consumer-facing decisions around the country. Thank you. Oh, there we go. I want to pick up on that and talk a little more about some of the drivers in the U.S., like what's actually driving action. And clearly, the actions of the Biden-Harris administration with the Investing in America agenda, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the IRA is a huge piece. But we also have, state policies and programs, lots of city policies, and then, private sector climate commitments. We've got a disclosure coming from multiple fronts, and then investors and shareholders as well. So there's like a lot of different drivers, and I'm just interested in, with each of the different perspectives here on the panel, kind of what you're seeing as some of the drivers for the actual implementation activity. And can we start with you, Paul?
Yes, it's actually very interesting to listen to Olga about their company's mission, which is to improve the quality of life, right, for the for the people that they serve, and it just happened to be the same for the Sacramento for SMUD. Our board actually has changed its mission and vision to really to be improving the quality of life for the people in Sacramento, but also be the trusted partner for inclusive zero carbon economy. So it's really interesting that, that when we're actually talking about this, how the different industry sectors are all striving for the same goal. So one interesting thing that we look at, being a public-owned utility serving the community, for us is always about how can we improve the equity transition to this clean energy future. I mean, we're very fortunate. I mean, SMUD is located in California, and California is probably one of the most progressive climate change policies in the whole nation, if not the world. And so we are completely aligned. I mean, from the state all the way to the to the city, the county, and then our organization. So we've been very fortunate that we've been getting a lot of funding, from both the federal and the state government in terms of how do you actually lead this equity transition. So for example, just last month, we actually got our $3 million, from our Congressman, Doris Matsui, that matches SMUD's also $3 million to electrify 300 homes in many underserved communities. So that, but not only that, so that actually helps them to improve the quality of life, help them improve the air quality inside their home, but more importantly, also reduces the energy burden. And on top of that, we said, you know what, besides doing that, how can we actually recruit from the local underserved communities to making sure the workforce that will work in those homes also come from those communities, because we want everyone to be part of this transition. And I think that's really one of the beauties, maybe in a state that is completely aligned with what our organization wants to do. So we are putting mobility hubs, in under-resourced communities, working with air quality districts, working with air quality resources boards, working with the county, the regional transit, to put mobility hubs in under-resourced communities, so those people that live there can actually get access to hydrogen vehicles, electric vehicles, to take their kids, to the doctors or to go to job interviews. So because we said, you know what, it's not enough to just, when you talk about clean energy transition, just the people have the resources to do it. You have to be very, very intentional to making sure everyone comes along. We have something called the Community Impact Plan. I think we're one of the first in the nation that actually mapped out every single community, what their income level is, education level, air quality, employment level, down to each of the zip codes. And then so we can be very, very intentional when we're developing energy efficiency programs, when we're developing, new technology that we're putting out there, in terms of helping them to improve the quality of, the air quality inside their homes, and improve, in terms of the energy bill burdens that they have. So I think this is actually very interesting. I'm listening, on this panel, that every single one on this panel have a huge contribution, from software to hardware to new technologies, to us working public-private governmental partnerships to making sure everyone participates in this clean energy transition.
Yeah, I love this question because I get to answer it on, on the ground really means global, federal, and local, right? I mean, the momentum that has been created in the last several years is undeniable at all of those levels. I've been in climate policy for 20 years, and it's really striking how much we're into the implementation phase now. And I'll give you a few examples. Of course, this conversation at COP, not just in this room, is no better example. Building off the COP from last year in Dubai, you're having major countries with a long history of deriving economic success from fossil fuels being serious discussants in this conversation around the transition. That's a huge amount of progress. You look at the International Maritime Organization regulations that are under discussion now and very likely to be adopted and enacted by the member countries. That's a hugely significant market signal for clean fuels in the marine space. We got an EU grant for that electrolyzer component manufacturing facility I mentioned. It was a 94 million euro grant. Couldn't have done it without that support. So, there's momentum at the EU level. In Brazil, we've got, hydrogen hubs, green hydrogen hubs coming to Brazil. They just passed an incentives package for hydrogen and a definition for clean hydrogen, strong momentum in an emerging economy. In the US, there is no question that the incentives deployed by the federal government have been a huge needle mover, literally hundreds of projects being announced and, final investment decisions being taken as a result of that support. At the state level, you know, there are many examples, but perhaps the one of the strongest is the low carbon fuel standard, which has, you know, been around for many years now and just went through an iteration of amendments. It is a huge market driver for renewable fuels that still need, you know, some mechanism to bridge that gap between conventional fuels and newer, cleaner technologies. So there's just so much momentum in this space right now. It's hard to keep up with all the different sectors being built, but it's very exciting.
And I think I heard last week that there's 600 new factories being built out of the BIL and IRA. So it is really exciting. Over to you, Ramo.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what's so important is that the momentum is baked in. And I don't just applaud the IRA, you know, for passing the IRA, but making it such that it can't be taken away. And I think that's a really important point at this time, that that the momentum that the federal government has been able to push has also been adopted by the private sector. And so what's ended up happening is there's this really nice push-pull that's creating even more momentum. So that private companies are taking things like in Europe, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, right? So that is now affecting what private companies are expecting to do, CSRD reporting, such that companies are saying, okay, well, that's what's required of us, and we're going to one up that, and we're going to do a better job of making those commitments ourselves. And so what I've been really impressed with is kind of how, I mean, Paul, you were talking about kind of the ecosystem, but how government regulations and private enterprise, and thankfully public pressure, right, is creating a positive feedback loop and creating more momentum such that we can take decarbonization seriously, take the actions that are needed, and have players across the entire system kind of contributing to that, so that we can make solutions, because we just have to do it faster. Like one, you know, the speed at which we need to act is phenomenal, and there's no more time to dilly-dally.
Absolutely. Coming back to you, Olga, you know, it's been a thread through, I think, the whole conversation that partnerships are critical, teamwork, working together. So I want to give each of you a chance to talk a bit about perhaps an innovation or something different that you're doing, because we've really seen public-private partnerships evolve in the last, I would say, like decade, as well as community engagement, which is so wonderful to see. It's an expectation now. It used to be an add-on or an afterthought after decision making, but now like communities are really integrated into making meaningful decisions about the transition. So you want to highlight some of what APP's been doing?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think over the last several years, we kind of, the country, have made tremendous strides and kind of in maturity and really centering on the voices of community and being serious about these relationships not being transactional, but really centering on them and having action be community driven. For example, the community change grants and the environmental justice grants. That's $2.8 billion invested directly in communities by the federal government. And it's not only that, it's investment in not only kind of capacity building for communities to be able to apply for these grants, but then, implement them, empower them with capacity building to implement them at scale. And that's over 2,000 communities benefiting across the country. That type of, that's sticky, regardless of who's in the White House, right? Once you build and invest in capacity in the communities, that's going to stay. They're going to continue driving that momentum. Another example, I think, is in Massachusetts through cumulative impact analyses. It sounds kind of wonky, but the idea being is that, you know, back kind of before, when you're applying for an air permit, you're only kind of evaluated by the emissions that your entity is saying it's going to disclose. We work with them with the state of Massachusetts to develop a cumulative impact analysis framework, where the evaluation is really around what else is going on at the community level in terms of climate hazards, in terms of socioeconomics. And now recently, they passed a new law that actually requires cumulative impact analyses for these permits. And the really critical part of that is that community engagement is right at the center of that and mandated. And so, you know, the kind of the data that we make available in terms of risk, you know, we develop more than 32 risk indices that are available to the communities, to the regulators, to the private entities, so that folks can be informed. And again, that type of investment and empowerment in communities, that's sticky, that stays, and that's going to continue the momentum.
Paul, you talked a lot about partnerships. Do you want to come in on any innovative things you'd like to share?
Yeah, one of the things that we actually like to share, you talk about, building partnerships. So being a public-owned utility, we've been actually working with over, I think, 500 community-based organizations in terms of, giving them what we call a shine grant, is actually giving them money to build capacity, how they can actually better serve the community. And it's been extremely successful. So in the last 5 years, we actually have given out maybe about $5 million, through the shine grants. And, and we actually look at those small those community-based organizations, even sometime, giving them $50,000 so that they can actually better serve the local community is such a huge difference for them. And so one of the things that, that we actually that we really pride ourselves on is that anytime we actually put any kind of rate process or any kind of new programs or any kind of, what we want to do, like even what we just went through, we are going to start a community process because we were going to shut down 2 of our plants that was actually in what we called, heavily impacted communities, because that's where the power plants was, or the cumulative impact. But because California right now is a little resource short, what we call, so there was actually difficulties in terms of, are we really going to shut down those plants? So we're actually having a conversation next year about, okay, well, obviously we need those plants to stay up for our own reliability. We're going to run those plants. But if we don't need those plants for our own reliability and we need to run it for the state's better, for the state's reliability, how are we going to share those benefits back to those local communities? And so what we found is that, you really, before you make really any major decisions about how you're going to impact the community when it comes to clean energy or rates or even air quality, you really need to have community engagements. So I think last year, SMUD, we had about almost 1,300 community meetings, from rates to program design to air qualities to, how do we want to shape, the new programs that we're developing. And we really found out that it's actually extremely beneficial. Not only that, we have obviously, I think we're the only utility in the US that our board gave us everything that we do, we need to have a 95% customer sat rating. And so having the community engaged in everything that we do is actually paramount. And then other things that I think, when I share with people, that we do all our work in public. So every 7 times a month, we have public meetings for our committee meetings and board meetings. And any public can come and speak for 10 minutes. So our board actually reminded me one time that, you know what, Paul, we start our meeting at 6 p.m. at night. And if you have 50 people mad at you, none of us are going home until 6 a.m. in the morning. So that kind of gives you, kind of the immediate feedback in terms of why engaging the community is important, for a personal reason. But really, if you think about, our only reason for existence, right, for being a public-owned utility is to better serve our community. So making them a part of the process to hear what they really want from utilities is actually paramount.
Yeah, and I mean, think in this transition, we've got to break down the barriers and ask people what they want and not make assumptions. So it's good you're having those conversations. All right, in our last few minutes, we'll do like a little lightning round. I'd love to hear what each of you is most excited about in terms of scaling, what you're seeing in your own work or others, and we can start at this end. Rob.
So I think a couple of these examples at the table about local. So because we're a technology company, we see it as a data problem. And since buildings are being built and the regulations in Baku are different than the regulations in London, are different than the regulations in Sacramento, we feel it's, again, our responsibility to have reliability of data so that data that we have the insights and analysis that anyone can use at any time, no matter where they are in the world, and making sure that that's helping to build more sustainable buildings, regardless of where you are in the world. And because it's hard for architecture, engineering, construction professionals even to build sustainably because they don't have that information at their fingertips. And so it's really teaching that. And then I was surprised none of us have talked about students, right? So, not to plug Autodesk, but the reason why we give all our software free to all students, education as students, educational institutions, and teachers is that we believe that we need to train the next generation of people in the community and then people who already are in the, in the built environment working, that they need to have the tools at their fingertips and understand how to use the tools. So we have certification programs and videos and, so that people can continue to learn from each other and with the new technology that's coming out. So, yeah.
Okay. Oh, one sentence, huh?
Sorry.
Okay, there's tremendous amount of momentum. Clearly, I mean, you hear this at COP, you hear it on this panel, but I think it's also important to know how many headwinds, not just in terms of the federal government change of priorities, but the fossil fuel industry is also quite mobilized, right? And it's really important to continue building those coalitions and evidence-based kind of broadening the constituencies, broadening the tent in terms of climate action. And I think, again, the health argument is really critical. Can I give an example or are we out of time? Oh my God. Okay, next.
I wish I knew what your example was. I would give it for you. I am most excited that we are in this implementation phase. It is not easy. We have financing challenges. We have all kinds of challenges, to be sure. But the fact that we are talking about how to implement clean energy instead of whether to implement clean energy is huge progress, and I'm real excited about that.
Yeah, I only have one word about coming to COB. This is my second COB. And the one word that comes to my mind is inspiring. It's inspiring to hear, countries big and small, even small villages in Africa, putting a cooktop together, and trying to really do their part to create a better world for all of us. I think is truly inspiring. And I agree with the panel that I think the momentum is enormous. And I think, what, no matter actually what happens, in terms, I think, I think the recent politics, no doubt that we are aware of, but I think the nationals, the subnationals, and really even small communities will step up and push this forward because I think everybody believes in the mission. So thank you.
Absolutely. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Wow, thank you. Really, thank you for bringing the positivity. And I'm left with just one word, two phrases. One, momentum that can't be stopped, and that there's no time to dilly-dally. So let's bring on our second panel. The three key words that you should listen for in this panel's discussion are policy, regulation, and planning, and hopefully some of that positive momentum as well. A warm welcome to our state and local government leaders from Texas, California, and Washington State that are going to showcase some of the efforts that they are leading to ensure an energy transition that is inclusive and sustainable and at the speed and rate that the crisis requires. So welcome to Amy Holm, Executive Director at the Climate Registry, who will moderate this session.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I was sitting with my fellow panelists during this last session and also listening to Chair Mallory. And we are very inspired and kept saying, wow, they're doing that, they're doing that. So we also look forward to speaking about what the public sector is doing in different geographical regions in the United States. To get started, what I'd like to do is ask each of our panelists here to, like the previous panel, tell us who you are, your role to advance climate action, and why are you here at COP. So I will start with Director Sam Assefa. Director, there you are.
Great. Can you hear me? Great. No, thank you for having me here. It's a wonderful conversation. I am the director of the California Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. My office was actually created in 1970 for the first time, right after the most stringent climate policy was enacted in California, the California Environmental Quality Act, actually created by a Republican governor, Ronald Reagan at that time. So my office is responsible for statewide land use policies, climate innovation, statewide coordination around the built environment, and more. Most of my work involves really engaging our state partners as well as communities large and small throughout California, and specifically in the last few years and now more and more focusing on the existential threat of climate change and how it specifically impacts both our most vulnerable communities, but also a significant amount of our health, well-being, and all of that. So my engagement in my office engagement is really around statewide policy and programs and grants associated with addressing climate change, land use, and equitable development throughout the state.
Thank you so much, Director Asefa. Thank you so much, Director Asefa. And we'll just go down the line here. And so State Senator Joe Nguyen from Washington, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming and joining us today. I'm State Senator Joe Nguyen from Washington State. Oftentimes when you're here, I have to clarify which Washington it is, the one with Microsoft and Boeing in the mountains. And, you know, I get to be the chair of our Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. And thankfully as well, for the last few years, we've had a climate champion as our governor, Jay Inslee, who was here as well. So as you can imagine, being the chair of the committee in which she probably talks about the most has been a very interesting experience. So for us in Washington, we've passed low carbon fuels, we've passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, we've passed what's called the Climate Commitment Act. It includes a provision called the HEAL Act as well. So we've done a number of things in this space to really give ourselves the best possible position to meet our decarbonization goals. And what I will say is, from a legislative perspective, winning is easy, but governing is a lot harder, obviously, for Hamilton folks to see the people that smiled. And that's where we are right now, where when you look at the work that's being done, part of it is this. Part of it is having the conversations around what we can do. But the hard part is actually, how do you get to the nitty-gritty? How do you work with communities? One example that I'll give, and kind of the inspiration for why I'm here, is the tribes are a very big deal for us in Washington State, the Yakima being one of the biggest ones for a lot of reasons. When I first went to meet with them, they have already had a position on clean energy, and they were very much opposed. And I just wanted to go as the chair, no agenda, went and visited with them. When you walk into their facilities, it happens to be in their casino, 3-story high picture of a tribal member fishing in the Columbia River about 200 years ago, or 150 years ago. There's a giant picture of an indigenous person fishing in the Columbia River. In that meeting, they had a picture up, and the very next slide was current day. Current day is the hydroelectric dam that's there right now. They can't fish there anymore. So a lot of the work that we're doing on climate change, you can't just look at what you can do in the future. You have to right the wrongs of the past as well. And if you don't do that first, you're going to have a hard time moving forward. I'm here to learn from everybody else, and I'm here to be inspired by some of this work, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Joe. And on my right here is Davina Hurd. And Davina, you wear and you have worn a number of hats in terms of the public sector. And so please describe your work that you're doing.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Davina Hurt. I currently serve on the City Council of Belmont in California. It's a small city, about 27,000 in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've also had the privilege of serving as mayor. Beyond working at the local level, talking about those many hats, I serve as several regional and statewide boards. That includes the chair of the board of directors for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and commissioner for Silicon Valley Clean Water and board member on the California Air Resources Board. And I want to thank the prior panel for the shout out. LCFS was indeed a heavy lift. My work really focuses on clean air, wastewater management, public health, the circular economy, transportation, and of course, climate protection. In my roles as a clean air regulator at both the state and regional levels, I've seen dramatic changes. And at the heart of these changes has been laws and solutions and regulations that are community driven. At the Air District in the Bay Area, we have actively transformed from what was a traditional regulatory model that primarily solves air quality problems at the regional level to one that works in partnership to reduce air pollution at the local level with communities. And I think this is the only way that we can do this effectively. We have to be proactive and truly advance environmental justice in and throughout our work. To this end, we established a community advisory council to guide our efforts. This has been an invaluable group for the board of directors as it relates to our programs and regulations. We have specifically spoken to overburdened communities about what their lived experiences are. We know that when diverse voices sit at the table, they talk about their lived experiences, we are creating not only effective solutions, but equitable one. And I think we can't say the E word enough, equity. In addition, we've co-developed and implemented community emission reduction plans with local communities. Working alongside them, we've designed our funding and incentive programs to target the most impacted communities. And one of our significant achievements, we adopted the first in the nation zero NOx appliance rule that will accelerate building electrification by mandating zero emission technologies. And we are integrating equity and community health solutions into that implementation. And I guess maybe the last thing I'll speak to is we've taken a really bold stance in holding polluters accountable. We recently passed state legislation to triple the maximum fines that polluters must pay. In some cases, it was not a sufficient deterrent. So we said, well, let's go to where the pocket is and see if that incites them to do more for the communities that they're impacted. We resulted in a historic $82 million fine on a refinery. That money will be invested directly into those communities that surround the refinery and have been negatively impacted. And I'll just say that I'm excited to be here to share our successes, build connections with everyone, partnerships. And I always get inspired by other authors and entrepreneurs. And I recently read a woman named Ruha Benjamin, and she said, remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the worlds you cannot live within. So we have vital work to do to that end. And I thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Davina. And now from the great state of Texas, we have Bridget Shea.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I'm here partly because this is such a great smorgasbord of solutions and great companies and great policies. So I come to sponge it all up. And I got into this work because of Dr. James Hansen's testimony to Congress. I'd been a journalist prior to that, and his testimony in 1988 changed my life. I came to Texas to work on climate issues and have been doing that for 36 years now. So I've had to figure out ways to talk to people about it so that they can actually hear what I'm saying. Because for a lot of people, just the phrase climate change is the immediate off switch. And so I've worked really hard to just try and understand what people's concerns are and speak to that. So for instance, and I ran for office because I was clear we weren't doing enough to prepare people for the impacts of climate change, which were really savaging a lot of communities. And people weren't using the power of local government sufficiently to work to reverse climate change and better protect people. And I think especially with our national elections, I mean, we have to say it, the work will move to the local level. It's not going to happen at the federal level anymore, which is deeply unfortunate. And I think that a lot of local elected officials don't sufficiently understand or recognize the really meaningful work they can do. So I'll just give a couple quick examples. One had to do with this, like speaking to people's fears and not focusing on the language of climate change. We're the second highest urban wildfire threat region in the country behind California. And almost no one knows that. They think they're safe because they live in a city. And so in one of my communities in my district, they're surrounded by forest essentially, and they have one very long, narrow road in and out of their community. And so we worked with them on a neighborhood wildfire evacuation drill. And we couldn't find any examples anywhere else. The closest thing we could find were the Japanese tsunami and earthquake drills, which everybody knows. They teach it in school. They have comic books. So everybody knows that, but we couldn't find any neighborhood wildfire evacuation drills that we would build on. So we built our own. And that was one of the things we won a national award for. We've now won 4 national awards for our climate resilience initiatives. But another one that we did during the pandemic, which I think a lot of other places have, but we codified it. We took action in May of 20 to adopt a policy to have 75% of our eligible employees, meaning people who didn't have to physically be to work in their jobs, to do their jobs, that they would telecommute or work remotely on a permanent basis. And we're still working out, the nuts and bolts of it, but we've pretty much made it work. And we were able to quantify greenhouse gas reductions from our employee commute. We did a greenhouse gas inventory thanks to ICLEI. I also have to say I'm the US board chair of ICLEI, so I'm a giant fan. But they helped us do a greenhouse gas inventory. We figured out employee commute and our fleet vehicles were the second highest, tied for second highest sources of emissions, and our buildings were the first, which is common for a lot of locations. So by having people work remotely, we've been able to reduce the amount of energy we're using in our buildings. We're still working out the kinks on that as well. If anybody has technologies for better thermostats so you can regulate different areas of buildings more effectively, I'm interested to talk with you. We also adopted a policy to convert our fleet vehicles to EVs or hybrids. And I just got some data from our staff. We've converted mowers, which people don't think about, but local governments use a lot of mowers. They've got a lot of parks and, areas that they have to convert. So we now have, I think it's 20 mowers that are EVs. And when we're finished working out the bugs of the supply chain for our electric chargers, which again, I'm not sure how this is such a problem, but it's caused a lot of delays for us. We'll be up to almost 300 electric vehicles purchased and able to charge with charging facilities that we're building. So these are just some of the things that you can do on the local level. And it's not hard, it's not expensive, but if local elected officials aren't thinking along those lines, they're not going to undertake those policies. So for me, that's a really big message. We have most of the technology to solve this problem. What we lack is the political will. And we're going to need to really build it and reinforce it at the local level. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And I think everybody on the panel today touched about the main theme here, which is climate change is very complex. Solutions are very complex and multifaceted. And there's challenges and there's opportunities so that's part of what the policy making is, to address those challenges and try to develop the policies that will help solve them. That's not always easy to do. So just to be doing a big dive in that. Joe, I'm going to start with you first on this question. How can public policy and regulatory decisions help scale climate action and also scale investments in mitigation, resilience, equity, building public support, and addressing barriers to action?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And what I'll start off with is I think a lot of the reasons why Washington State's been successful in the past couple of years is that we failed for a long time beforehand. We had a couple of carbon policies that failed at the ballot, that failed at the initiatives, failed in the legislature. And only recently have we passed what's called the Climate Commitment Act over these last few years that has been wildly successful. That was challenged on the initiatives this year by a conservative hedge fund manager and overwhelmingly was supported by the people of Washington State. In fact, 7 counties that went red in Washington State voted to keep climate policies. The 2 demographics that we saw had the largest support for climate policies, young people and older Republicans were the ones that were the most supportive of it. So I think part of why I say that is that partnership is really important. I think oftentimes, at least in my party, we tend to have a little bit of hubris and we don't talk to people that are impacted by policies. When I work on policies with my committee, what I ask my team to do is you have to talk to somebody who disagrees with you. You have to talk to somebody who has to actually administer the policy, and you have to talk to somebody who has to actually be impacted by it. And I think it took us 3 tries for us to get there. One of the main components of the policy that I think really works well for communities, we mandated equity in it. We have what's called the HEAL Act, Healthy Environments for All. You have to have an EJ lens as you make some of the investments. There's a committee that helps us inform the investments. I happen to be the budget writer, so I work with them a lot. 35% of the funds, so far we raised about $3 billion, goes towards underserved communities. 10% specifically goes towards tribes as well. So people saw themselves in these policies. It wasn't abstract and it wasn't some random general fund allocation. It was specific projects that are in their communities. So you have to engage people in a very authentic way. You have to be very clear and simple about that engagement. The dollar figures certainly help. And because we have those things in place, we were able to spend all of last year talking about the great investments that we made. And I think that's why it was successful.
Thank you, Joe. And Bridget, I'd like you to also just add on to that question. And obviously, you've had some recent experience with rolling out programs and in the community. How do you advance climate action, scale climate action, and build that public support for those efforts?
I think a really important element of that is to really try and understand what people are concerned about. So for instance, in Texas, well, in Austin, we have a whole chain of lakes that were created by LBJ to electrify the Central Texas area, and they're a great amenity for the community. But we are also experiencing greater and greater drought, and so people are literally seeing these lakes dry up and turn into, you know, sort of small puddles. So there's a real concern about drought and about water conservation and having enough water for the future. And unfortunately, a lot of the organs that would normally be doing this kind of preservation are prohibited by policy from taking climate change into account, which is just, I mean, even the Republicans who live along the lakes recognize this is idiotic. And so we've worked on initiatives where the county can conserve water. And there again, is technology that's readily available. We use, and I have to give a big shout out to the city of Austin. We're the county government, but the city of Austin has created a number of initiatives that make it much easier to do the right thing. So they have a purple pipe system, which pipes treated wastewater to large water users in order to stretch our drinking water supply. But not many people were using it. And I've been sort of hounding people about it. But when I got elected, we made a policy decision to convert as many of our large buildings to using purple pipe for our air conditioning. Texas is hot. We use a lot of water for air conditioning through evaporative cooling systems. You don't need treated drinking water for that. So we converted 7 buildings, including our jail, to using purple pipe treated wastewater, which would otherwise be discharged down the Colorado River for our air conditioning systems. No one notices. They don't drink the water supply for the air conditioning systems. And we're permanently eliminating the demand for over 45 million gallons of water a year just on 7 buildings. If the state capitol complex converted, they could get close to 1 billion gallons of water permanently eliminated on the demand side, leaving it in the reservoirs. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit solutions, but we're partnering with the city of Austin. It's taking longer than we want to extend the purple pipeline to our newest building, but it's making it possible for us to do massive water conservation and save money. The cost of the treated wastewater is a fraction of the cost of the treated drinking water. So there's every incentive built in, but it's truly a situation where if people don't already do it, they don't know how to do it, or they think it's too difficult.
And Davina, turning to you, I'd like to hear your opinion about integrated strategies that prioritize climate action, decarbonization, and to Bridget's point, bringing up about resiliency and the challenge of resiliency along with decarbonization. So how do you address those strategies, and also with some of the public health benefits that we're trying to get out of the climate strategies?
Together, we envision in the Bay Area that we can achieve our climate goals, foster thriving communities, healthy natural systems, and a prosperous economy. And on that path to that future, we're trying to create family-sustaining jobs, inspiring innovation, improving air quality, and public health, as you noted. And the Bay Area specifically has made a really strong commitment in the Bay Area to Regional Climate Action Plan. It's a mouthful. We call it BARCAP. And this plan represents a comprehensive strategy just to reduce the region's contribution to global climate change, improving air quality, and enhancing climate resilience. The Air District is leading that effort with funding from the US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And under the IRA, there's been bipartisan support. So we are confident too that it will continue to escalate and become an important part of the region. The funding really gives an action plan clearly for the Northern and Central Bay Area. When we had this planning process, there were two parts to it. The first part, we'll call it the first phase, we developed the Priority Climate Action Plan. And that's where we look specifically at near-term implementation ready actions. We addressed two key sectors. It was transportation and residential building. Those sectors together account for over 25% of the region's GHG emissions. We then, during that process, the Air District prepared inventory for the Bay Area, and we split it up into 6 major sectors. We talked about transportation, commercial and residential, electricity generation, industrial, waste management, and agriculture. And for perspective, we discovered that the total GHG emissions for the Bay Area was in the region of 60 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So then we said, okay, now we know the lay of the land. Let's move to the second phase where we focused on creating climate action plans. We call them CCAPs. And those CCAPs outlined the long-term strategies for reducing emissions across all the sectors I mentioned earlier. Just really ensuring that the frontline communities, those most impacted by pollution and climate change, are prioritized in those plans. And one of the key transportation measures that we truly looked at was reducing vehicle miles traveled by expanding access to clean, accessible, and affordable transportation options, creating mobility hubs, electric vehicle charging, micro mobility options like bikes and scooters, all in the goal to truly reduce single occupancy vehicles, low in carbon emissions, and improve air quality. In the residential sector, the plan that we created, it promotes building decarbonization. I spoke to it earlier about our NOx appliance rule. There, we're really trying to transition swiftly away from natural gas and accelerating electrification in our homes. The rule that I mentioned earlier is going to forbid the sale and installation of polluting home appliances starting in 2027. And so this effort will reduce indoor and outdoor air pollution, lower energy bills, and contribute to healthier living conditions that I think sometimes we take for granted how clean our indoor and outdoor air is. And this approach is going to not only create jobs, but also trust with the community and engagement that long needs to be restored.
Thank you, Davina. And Director Acefa, we just talked a little bit, you heard Davina talk about the role of policy in building resiliency and community health benefits. And I want to bring in how nature-based solutions fit into the broader framework of decarbonization and a role that they can play in enhancing community resilience.
Great. Before I answer that, I forgot to answer one of your questions from the previous one, which is why are you here? I just want to emphasize that in addition to the same reasons that California has been here for the last 10 years to emphasize the importance of climate change and learn and share, it was very important this time from the Newsom administration that our California is present to actually emphasize that regardless of what happens in the national politics and the election, California will be there on this issue, and we will actually double down in the work that we're doing. That's why myself and my colleagues from the administration have been here for the last couple of weeks. In terms of nature-based solutions, actually, a significant amount of our programs integrate nature-based solutions as part of our climate mitigation and adaptation process. We have a robust program, for example, of 81 strategies that really focus on our working land as well as urban and rural land that affects close to 3.4 million acres of land that is focused on how we use nature-based solutions to actually address decarbonization as well as protecting working land. As you know, we are the first state to commit to 30 by 30, a commitment to conserve 30% of the world's land and water by 2030. California is already ahead of that game, almost 25% of land conservation and 16% water for already has been in coastal waters have been preserved. These targets are actually in motion both to protect and restore natural and working lands, but also to promote healthy ecosystems and store and sequester carbon. In a number of programs, we incorporate urban greening as local plans. So one of the work that my office does, in addition to land use planning, we also have grants programs that really target the criteria of which are emphasizing urban greening as part of any development to address climate, but also to address quality of life. We and more now are integrating indigenous knowledge in our science-based or data-based information to affect policy and grants and investments. And one of the work that we're doing currently is the 5th climate assessment, which for the last 4 assessments, we worked with scientists to see what the latest in science is telling us around climate change. We are doing that, but except this time we added indigenous knowledge as one of the bases by which we should inform our climate investments and policies. And a significant amount of that really focuses on nature-based solutions to address a lot of the climate challenges. We also have very specific programs and funding for tribal nature-based solutions to advance both shared climate goals, but also economic opportunities. So it is a critical part of a number of programs that we implement, but also ensuring that in the investments and funds that we put forward. And then lastly, I would say that some of the solutions are coming from, not from the state and government, more and more engagement at the local level. And one of the most successful program where some of it entails, nature-based urban farm and other resiliency solutions come from the Transformative Climate Communities program in our strategic council, strategic growth council within my office. The previous speakers spoke about the $2.9 billion federal investments that is focused on communities. The TCC program was actually part of the model that really created that kind of solution. So a lot of the solutions that come from the ground, nature-based solutions, are some critical part of their proposals in those programs.
And for some of you may not know, Director Acefa's office was for many years called the Office of Planning and Research, OPR. And so great credit to the governor and others in the administration to change the title of it to land use, and it's climate innovation, isn't it? Climate innovation. So really walking the walk and messaging what that work is about. And I think that's very important too. Bridget, I want to talk to you a little bit and find out what's happening with nature-based solutions in Texas in your area.
We've done a couple of things, one of which we coordinated with the Nature Conservancy on it. They have a kind of a template, which we've borrowed for ICLEI and sent it out so that other communities can do the same thing. It basically, walks through what nature-based solutions look like at the local government level and how you can incorporate them into projects. And the brilliant thing that we did, and I have to give credit to one of my colleagues on the commissioner's court, her staff was really smart about this. They basically, so we adopted a policy, and in the policy, we gave direction that the kinds of examples of nature-based solutions needed to be included in every county construction project, and that it, and really importantly, that it needed to be part of the evaluation matrix for determining which vendor got the project. And so there's an immediate incentive for all the construction companies to pay attention. What is this nature-based solution stuff? And let's make sure we include it in whatever proposal we put in for the county construction projects. So I thought that was a genius piece of it. So we now have it built into all of our construction projects for county stuff. And then the other thing we're working on, and I think this is another thing local governments can do, we have a lot of land. We have parks. We've been doing a lot of purchasing of conservation easements, particularly in areas where you've got sensitive groundwater supplies. And much of that land can be used for agriculture, not all of it, but a lot of it. And so we're working with any of the people who have ag contracts to grow hay or whatever, to transition them to use regenerative agriculture practices. And again, staff came up with a brilliant but simple example for how to structure it, and that was to give the farmers a choice. They can either get a longer, cheaper ag contract if they employ, you know, a menu of regenerative agriculture practices, or they can get a shorter, more expensive lease if they don't do it. So it's a great way to build it in. And then we're working with groups that are doing really creative regenerative ag practices on some of our conservation easements, and particularly working with refugee communities coming from agricultural societies. So there's a lot that can be done at the local level.
So building the solutions into the policy and the planning. Now this next question is going to be for Joe and Davina. As elected officials, how do you balance the immediate needs of your constituents while also advancing climate action, both in this critical decade and over the longer term? Joe?
Perfect. So climate policy oftentimes is synonymous with cost, and it's synonymous with rising fuel costs or energy costs as well. We were very aware of that dynamic and how detrimental that can be towards the work that's being done. Upgrading buildings can be expensive, fuel can get expensive, things like that can get very expensive. So the very first thing that you have to do when you work on climate policies in very overburdened communities is there has to be a level of trust. If they're already skeptical of government policies, if they already associate these policies with cost, it doesn't matter how good your policy is, you're not going to win at the ballot and you're not going to win the hearts and minds of people. I think having credible messengers informing some of the work that's being done is very important. But baked into the Climate Commitment Act, again, we kind of had this magical tool that happened to include $3 billion, where we can give energy rebates to families. Built into the system, they had what was called consigned revenue, where the utilities would have energy credits for low-income communities. Part of the programs that we put out there, we knew that EVs were expensive. We have a lease program where if you're a low-income family in Washington State, you can lease a new car for $75 a month. And our electricity rates are pretty cheap. So you're talking $20 for the whole, month as well. So you have to have very tangible things that benefit people directly. And then this is the key. You have to brag about it all the time. You have to put money towards it. You have to put websites up. You have to have community members talk about it. If you don't talk about your good policies, it doesn't matter, because nobody knows that you did it. Democrats are terrible at talking about policy. So there you go. Yeah. So that is part of the effort that you have to do, is you actually have to put forth things that people first off care about, can see is very tangible. Loss aversion is very real for us as well. So you have to put it out there and let them know that these things are good. If we don't do climate policies, bad things could potentially happen. And then you have to brag about it, like very clearly in plain language, that climate change is great. These things are great. You want to keep them. Your life is better because of it, and move forward.
Ina?
Thanks. I absolutely agree with the senator that it's challenging to balance all these things, and we need to shout our praises about what's really working in our communities. But we also have to bring the community in at the start when we're creating these plans and these projects, so that this is really their plan and their project, not necessarily the government's. And one of our key strategies is community-centered program called AB 617, which is a community air protection program that directly addresses the immediate air quality issues that lay the groundwork for the long-term solutions. And it's a community partnership model where we bring different folks from all around the community, industry, NGOs, into the room and talk about what are the things most impacting the local communities. How do we develop and implement new strategies that impact health? And how do we do this together? Since 2018, California has committed $1.2 billion to building the Community Air Protection Program. And it has been one of the most essential tools that not only CARB, but local air districts are using to build that trust, to create change that communities can see now in that moment, but also know that they're planting the seeds for the future. And I think it's also important to state that we're focusing on those who have been disproportionately impacted. So that's low income, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have historically been marginalized. So AB 617, at least in the Bay Area, we have one in West Oakland, Bayview Hunters Point, East Oakland, Richmond, North Richmond, and there are 19 communities statewide. We're looking for partnerships when it comes to innovative technologies. We're looking for folks to say, how can we just improve the space, whether it's industrial, transportation corridors, and create inertia to create the change that's really necessary and prioritize really immediate health needs that folks are needing, and also to empower them. I think we recognize that, equity is really at the heart of all these goals, and it's not about us telling folks what they should and need to be doing. It is just about giving them the tools so that they can make the changes in their world.
Well, thank you, Davina. We just have a short amount of time left. I think we could spend another hour and a half just talking about these topics, but we're going to do a rapid fire conclusion. I'm going to ask each of you to mention the biggest challenge, the biggest opportunity that you see for us moving forward on climate. And I'll start with you, Bridget.
I think the biggest challenge is it's really hard to talk with people about what's happening. I mean, we're really talking about world-ending problems, and it's terrifying for people. So I struggle with trying to figure out how to talk to people about it so it doesn't sound terribly alarming, which it's terribly alarming, and to get people to realize that they can actually do things about it. It's not this impossible challenge that they're helpless to do something about. So I think those are the biggest challenges.
Oh, I agree. And I would say another challenge is this work is insanely difficult and hard. And it requires training and ongoing staff and community really being invested. And they are, but they also have to put food on their table and pay bills. So the challenge is to keep people at the table, continuing this work for the short and long term. The opportunities that I see is that there's money available through the IRA and California to really invest in communities in a way we've never done before. And I look forward to working with all of you to see what technologies or partnerships we can create for those communities.
Mine's a little bit more tactile. It's siting and permitting, at least from our perspective. We want to have more clean energy. Doing siting and permitting is very difficult for a number of reasons. But I think the opportunities that we have there is we're starting to see some changes in terms of people understanding how critical this is for not just Washington State, but the broader community as well. But that's my portfolio work right now is siting and permitting.
And last word, Dr. Sefa, I'm promoting you in this panel.
I'll take doctor as well. Biggest challenge, I think, achieving equitable adaptation and decarbonization decarbonization while protecting frontline communities. Biggest opportunity as a historian of cities and urban planner, what I know is some of the biggest challenges that we have are what actually leads us to the most incredible and transformative solutions. We have never had an opportunity like we have now, from a federal investment, historic investment, to state investment, to alignment, significant amount of the population. This is the time to actually make transformative change, although we have very short windows, but the opportunity is, again, unprecedented.
Thank you to all the panelists. Back to you, Laura.
Well, on behalf of all of the co-hosts for today's panel, we really thank you for spending all this time with us this afternoon. So it's really been a great discussion from both the private sector and public sector perspectives. I do want to take a moment to celebrate the progress and the great examples that you've all brought forth today. Let's all take a moment to brag about it. Thank you, Senator Nguyen, for that inspiration. And good luck to the rest of you all, as you conclude your time here at COP, and meeting adjourned.